This conference will now be recorded.
Good morning, dear members and industry colleagues. A hearty welcome to all of you to today's web seminar on Budget 2022, organized by the German Engineering Federation VDMA in association with Rödl Partner Consulting Private Limited. We hope all of you and your family and colleagues are safe and doing well. I am Jamri John, based out of the Mumbai office of VDMA, and I'll be taking you through the session today. Before we continue, we'll request all of you to kindly keep your microphones muted at all times. You could continue to post your questions to us under the chat box section, and this will be taken up during the last leg of the web seminar, that is during the Q&A. Next slide. VDMA continues to be committed to India. VDMA, the Mechanical Engineering Industry Association, was founded in November 1892 and is the most important voice for the mechanical engineering industry. VDMA represents around 3,400, mostly medium-sized companies, making it the largest industry association in Europe. The members who currently contribute to around 79% as exports, which is equivalent to 205 billion euro production. Recognizing the very early significance of India as a future market for our member companies, India was one of the first overseas offices among the BRIC countries. VDMA continues to be the very well-established offices spread across in Mumbai, in Noida, Kolkata, and Bangalore. Next slide. We would like to give you a quick update on the upcoming workshops to be organized by VDMA in the coming weeks. The first one being on the 11th of February, where we'll be conducting the virtual workshop on Microsoft Excel, making data more meaningful. The objective of this workshop is to show practical examples and case studies to help in understand the benefits of analyzing and interpreting data through Microsoft Excel to remain competitive in computing technology, thereby providing the best results for your company. The second workshop on demystifying Industry 4.0 will be held on the 18th of February, giving participants an overview on the key concepts of future smart factories, the cyber physical systems and physical processes within these factories, and the virtualization techniques and intelligent decision-making capabilities which support managers in leading these initiatives, along with the demonstrations and projects. The coordinates of the VDMA colleagues which are appearing on the slide will also be shared in the chat box for easy reference, and we'll request you to kindly reach out to them if you're interested to register for these workshops. Next slide. For today's web seminar, we will have the welcome address from Mr. Rajesh Nath, Managing Director, VDMA India. We have amongst us Mr. Rohit Bhagade, the Chief Financial Officer for SAP India Subcontinent, as our esteemed chief guest. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Bhagade. He shall be making the special address on the Budget 2022, the impact on the manufacturing sector. This will be followed by the presentation from Rödl Partner on the latest changes in the legal and tax framework. We will then finally conclude with a Q&A session. With no further delay, I'd like to hand it over to you, Mr. Nath. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Emily, and hearty welcome to all the VDMA members and friends from the industry and the Indo-German fraternity to this web seminar on the key takeaways on the Union Budget 2022-23, being organized by the German Engineering Federation, VDMA, along with our competent partners, Rödl Partners. Extend a warm welcome to our chief guest today, Mr. Rohit Bhagade, Chief Financial Officer, SAP India Subcontinent. Welcome to you, Rohit. Also, a warm welcome to our speakers from Rödl Partner, Anand Ketan, Chetan Kakaria, and Sumitra Dole. So, hearty welcome to all our speakers today. Friends, the run-up to the budget is always filled with clamor from the industry and taxpayer on the changes necessary. So one can say that this is curtailed. Yet the government taxation target and expenditure decision request our participants, please. I just request all our participants kindly keep yourself unmuted while the discussion is going on. Please keep yourself unmuted. So friends, yet the government taxation targets and expenditure decisions offer as much as a view of the state of the economy as they do to the direction of the political winds. As the union budget wish lists go, this year there was a host of expectations from various segments of the economy: industry, consumer, and investors. This was because the household sector is much weaker after the pandemic. Small and medium enterprises have been suffering blow after blow since the first hit they took was the demonetization in 2016 and are basically hanging by a thread. Contact-based services have been worst hit by on-again, off-again lockdowns induced by the virus. Further, it is imperative that private investments make a comeback so that the growth momentum picks up and sustains itself. The stated intent of the government has been to keep fiscal deficits, the gap between expenditure and revenue, in check. A long-term path from 9.5% in financial year 21 to 6.8% in financial year 22 and 4.5% by financial year 26 was articulated last year. So clearly the expectation is that the budget lifts all boats so that fiscal 2023 ushers in a broad-based recovery. Friends, John F. Kennedy had popularly quoted, "The federal government is the people, and the budget is a reflection of their needs." So have the expectations of the people been met in this budget, union budget of 2022-23? Then we would look forward to the hearing from our experts today if the budget has hit the bullseyes, missed the bullseye, or lies somewhere in between. I would now like to invite Mr. Rohit Bhagade, CFO, SAP India subcontinent, for his expert views on the budget. Over to you, Rohit.
Thanks, Rajesh. Hope you are able to hear me well. Perfect. Thank you. It is indeed a thank you. So this is indeed a privilege for me to be of you talking about my take on the budget 2022. So thank you for having me here today. The budget that was announced on 1st Feb by our Honorable Finance Minister clearly focuses on sustainable long-term growth while also undertaking what we call as fiscal consolidation. My personal view is that this is progressive and a very growth-oriented budget. 22-23 would be the first relatively normal year for us after the pandemic has really impacted growth in the last 2 years. Due to pandemic, India's GDP declined 7.3% in FY21, and we are now expecting GDP to grow about 9.2% in 21-22. If we compare the real GDP between pre-pandemic days and now, the real growth is about only 0.8%. For the next year, which is FY 22-23, the GDP is expected to grow between 8 to 8.5%. Now, there are agencies like etc., which are talking about GDP growing above 9%, but let's for now talk about 8 to 8.5%. Total exports have crossed more than $650 billion, if of course, if we include services as well. Now, let me talk a little bit about fiscal deficit. And Rajesh, you spoke about it, but I just wanted to give a broader picture here. Fiscal deficit is estimated to be at about 6.9 for FY22. Now, if you look at the first year of the pandemic, the fiscal deficit was 9.3%. So we have made progress in terms of reducing the fiscal deficit from 9.3% to about 6.9%. What we are budgeting for the next year is about 6.4%. So this is in line with the long-term ambition which the government had outlined, wherein the long-term ambition is that the fiscal deficit as a percentage of GDP has to be about 4.5% by FY 25-26. What this also implies is that every year we need to reduce the fiscal deficit by 0.6 to 0.7% over the next 3 to 4 years. This budget, in my view, puts huge focus on capital expenditure. While the total expenditure of government is expected to grow 4% versus last year. The capital expenditure is expected to grow at about 25%. What that means is the revenue expenditure is expected to go only 1% year on year. So the budget clearly signals prioritization of capital expenditure over revenue expenditure. If India is to grow at higher rates on a sustained basis, my view is that the infrastructure outlay is really the key, and the increased allocation would really help us propel as an economy. The challenge here is to look at the implementation or the accelerated way to implement this. From a revenue standpoint, both GST and income tax collections, which is direct tax collections, are projected to grow in double. The total revenue is expected to grow 7.6% from a government standpoint. So, all in all, I would say a good balanced scorecard from a revenue standpoint. Let's talk about interest, right? Because the fiscal deficit, especially in the last 2 years, has been a matter of great concern. The interest payment as a percentage of revenue for us about 42 to 43%, and that is up from 39% in the previous year. So out of 100 rupee of revenue that we earn, roughly 40 goes into interest payouts for the debt that we have. We have a significantly high debt to GDP ratio as of today. We currently stand at about 74%. This makes it very difficult for the government to spend on other areas unless we have a robust revenue growth. Look, as the CFO of an organization, I can completely correlate to that because that's what we go through day in and day out while managing our operations. Purely from a budget perspective, I think there are 7 to 8 very important themes that emerged from the budget. Number one is on spectrum auction. Finally, we heard that the auction would be conducted in 2022 for the rollout of 5G services. We also heard about contracts for laying optical fiber will be awarded under BharatNet, right? So the government is kind of accelerating that momentum from an overall infrastructure creation is concerned as far as telecom is concerned. Number two, data center will be included in the list of harmonized list of infrastructure. Now, what that means is that the credit availability, whether it is financial institutions or banks, will kind of go up as a result of this particular move. The third one is the entire conversation on green bonds. Issuance of green bonds, the sovereign green bonds, which will help from us to reduce what we call as carbon intensity. A government commitment towards climate change and net zero was clearly seen in this particular budget. India definitely has an aspiration to be net zero by 2070, and the steps have been taken to strengthen the ecosystems for urban sustainability, PLI allocation for solar power, etc., etc. The fourth theme that clearly emerged was defense R&D. So while the overall defense expenditure went up a little bit, but not by too much, but the defense R&D will be opened up for industry, startups, academia, with 25% defense R&D budget earmarked for private collaboration. Now that's a step in the right direction, and you would see a really good collaboration happening between the private players and the likes of DRDO, etc. uh, the focus on infrastructure, when we talk about the expansion of highways, right? The government is talking about 25,000 kilometers to be added as highways next year. Now, that roughly translates to 70 plus kilometers per day. Now, India as a country has never had 70 kilometers per day of a road laying on a daily basis. And if we compare that with a country like China, even China has not done that in the past. So, this entire thrust towards infrastructure investments really going to help us propel, whether it is about capacity utilization or whether it is about additional capacity or at the end of the day about job creation. This is really going to help us out. The launch of digital rupee using blockchain and other technology is another area that needs to be double clicked on. While the government has not really given a lot more in terms of how this is going to help, but again, we should all watch out for this particular space to understand this better. Taxation on virtual digital asset at 30%, no deduction set off allowed. Again, a welcome change because earlier there was a regulatory vacuum which has now been removed by giving clarity on taxation on virtual digital asset. Some of the important policies like the conversation on battery swapping policy, interoperability standard, which are to be formulated, which basically gives us hope that the government is looking more long term in terms of helping the citizens, right, in the overall scheme of things. The emergency credit line guarantee scheme for MSMEs is extended till March 2023. And there is a separate fund earmarked for hospitality and related enterprises. Again, a welcome move in my particular view. The startup ecosystem and the new operations ecosystem, the sunset date for incorporation of startup to be eligible for tax holidays is extended by 1 year. Again, a great news. Sunset date for commencement of business by new manufacturing companies for availing what we call as concessional tax regime is also extended by 1 more year. So again, all these are, in my view, steps in the right direction, which will really help us from a long-term perspective. And this is in line with what our finance minister was talking about in the previous budgets as well. Now, and I saw a question on SEZ. SEZ Act will be replaced by new legislation to enable states to become partners in development of enterprise and service hub. Now, the government has not given more information on this, so we are awaiting the fine prints of what this not new legislation will do to us. But again, the reality today is, on an average, if you look at India, 30 to 40% of SEZs today are lying vacant, and hence this collaboration between the new legislation and the state governments is really going to help us improve the utilization, and at the end of the day that will really flourish in the overall scheme of things. My last point on what I observed was there was a very clear focus on digital and technological initiatives. The announcement on e-passport, Indian Post implementing core banking, which means the banking reaches the last mile when we talk about villages, etc. Because there is no one else who has the kind of reach which India Post has. I think that these are all steps in the right direction, which is really going to help us from a long-term perspective. Of course, while the expectation was that areas such as subsidy, healthcare would get more budget, but we are not looking at big bang announcements on one day. Maybe 10 years back, we would look at the month of February in anticipation to find out what government is going to do. But if you look at this government, what they have done in the last 2 to 3 years, the budget is an announcement, hopefully a big bang announcement, but the government follows it up by having a very agile way of making right investments throughout the year, as and when needed and where needed. So I'm still expecting a lot more to come from this government for this year as well in terms of additional interventions that are required. One area which was a little bit of a disappointment, if you ask me, was this entire disinvestment budget that the government had. They achieved only 8% of the target disinvestment budget for last year. I'm hoping that disinvestment of PSUs will accelerate in this year and in coming years. LIC IPO, by the way, will be of definite help for us. The direct tax part of the budget finished inside 10 minutes. And I think we all talk about productivity improvement. We all talk about doing more with less. On a lighter note, I can say that our finance minister finished the entire budget presentation within 90 minutes. Typically, it used to take 2 hours, right? So we can see productivity improvement right up there. But on another note, no news is a good news as far as taxpayers are concerned. And that's how I look at the entire direct tax part of the budget. I would like to conclude by saying that this government is looking at the infrastructure investment as a way growth, which will eventually create jobs. We are talking about utilization of capacity, generation of additional capacity, and finally job creation. This is long term, so you may not see any changes in the next 3 to 6 months. But if these investments continue, we can look at a really long term 8 to 9% growth for India, which will help us in our long term ambition. So, Rajesh, that's my view on the budget. Over to you.